If you're a regular listener to When the Facts Change, you'll know that I think absolutely everything is always about housing. And if only we could build hundreds of thousands of new, warm, dry, carbon neutral, or even better, carbon negative houses, which means you store carbon in the house itself, then everything would be fine. We would have affordable homes, we would meet our carbon emissions targets, and people would be healthier, the planet would be healthier, and everyone would be much better off. But of course, New Zealand has amongst the most expensive housing in the world. It is mouldy, it is cold, it contributes to the atrocious poverty issue that we have in Aotearoa, and if only we could build so many of these homes affordably, many of our problems would be solved. So I'm always on the lookout for a way to solve these problems, to kill more than two birds with one stone. Just imagine if we could reduce our carbon footprint, store a lot of carbon in a home, make it warmer and drier, and do it a lot cheaper. And in the process, compete away a duopoly in the housing materials market. Just imagine if we could do all that. Well, I love a story on When the Facts Change in which we do all that, or at least have the opportunity to do it. This week on When the Facts Change, I speak to the co-founder of GEOBIND, Alice Hosted, who is in Kirikiri working on a binder, a bit like lime, to mix up with water and with hemp hurd. Now you might wonder, what is hemp hurd? It is essentially the bits left over after you've harvested the hemp. So that's the plant that looks a lot like cannabis but isn't really cannabis that you grow industrially, and it can be harvested for seeds and for feed and is one of the historically most productive ways to farm land. You get all sorts of good stuff out of it. It also turns out to be one of the most efficient storers of carbon, even more efficient than growing a pine tree. So we could do that in New Zealand. We've only been doing it relatively recently at any sort of scale because of the problems legally and, frankly, culturally with growing large amounts of hemp out in the open. GEOBIND is a way in which we could turn that hemp and suck that carbon out of the atmosphere and use it to build homes. This week on When the Facts Change, we find out from Alice exactly how you do it, the opportunity that's there, and describe what a warm, dry, affordable home built from materials grown in New Zealand that suck up carbon could look like. Because at the moment, most of our homes are built with insulation made of pink fluffy things. We have fiberboard, we have gibboard, in which a brand becomes the actual product. And we've just had a market study trying to work out how we could improve the cost of building a home. We're also in the process of redesigning our building materials standards to get to net zero by 2030 for building materials themselves. We're also thinking about how we administer our emissions trading scheme so that people can plant trees and get paid credits. Just imagine if you could plant houses and get paid credits. A house, which we think of now as a money pit, could actually be a money tree. That's this week on When the Facts Change. Well, welcome to When the Facts Change. Alice Hosted from GEOBIND, the co-founder, talking to us from Kirikiri. Great to have you on the show.
Hi, Ben. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm fascinated with the process of building homes and how we could do it differently. Tell us about how you could build a home with something called GEOBIND and something called SHIV, or hemp hurd.
Yeah, so GEOBIND is a geopolymer binder that myself and GEOBIND co-founder, Doug Stark, who's also my partner, have developed. And it's a binder that gets used with hemp shiv, or also hemp hurd, which is the same thing, different name, a byproduct from the industrial hemp kind of industry. It's generally a waste product or used for animal bedding. And you can mix our product with hemp shiv, hemp hurd, and a bit of water, and it forms a kind of concrete-like to look at wet material that you can then use to build your house. So you can use it by tipping it into a framing structure around a typical wooden framed type house setup. And with a little bit of compaction, just by hand, it sets and forms a walling system. So it acts as the insulation, and you render it or add whatever exterior cladding you'd like to it, and then you've got your whole walling system. So replacing the likes of an insulation material, a cavity system, and then your walling finish on top of that.
And this wall, hempcrete, how is it different from what we have at the moment, let's say gibboard and pink bats and some weatherboard, in terms of how warm it is and how it copes with moisture and warmth?
Yeah, so there are some really huge beneficial properties of this product. So namely, and probably a really hot one at the moment, is that it's carbon neutral and is also referred to as being carbon negative as well. So we're claiming carbon neutral at the moment and doing the testing or certification to confirm carbon negative. But this method of building using hempcrete is really kind of internationally acknowledged as being carbon negative. We just want to make sure we've got the paperwork to to confirm that kind of statement. But it has a whole heap of other benefits as well, as you kind of alluded to. So it's what is called hygroscopic. And so that means that it's really good at controlling humidity. It allows humid air to pass through it. So that in turn means that it doesn't get mouldy, and it kind of reduces your operational carbon emissions as well, because it makes for a much easier space to climate control, to heat and cool. It's also, because of the minerals that we've used in our binder, it's really safe for application. So silicosis is something that where my partner Doug, who's a builder and has been for 20 years, is particularly wary of in this industry, and asbestosis as well. But because of the type of minerals that we've used, which do not include silica, there's no risk to the installer in that regard. And we have a really an SDS, or a safety data sheet, that we're really proud of there, because there's no risks identified to installers on that. It's compostable, so the shiv, the hemp hurd that's used, and the binder, naturally occurring products, they can actually be broken down at the end of life and used as a soil conditioner, or you could repurpose it into a renovation within your house, or in another building if you wanted to. It's also mold resistant. So we talked about it being hygroscopic, but it also, the nature of the minerals that are used in it, similar to the more typical lime-based binders, they don't promote mold growth. So those things combined make it really critical to addressing the reduction in carbon needed in the New Zealand building industry, but also these healthy home standards, which are, just critical. We live in Northland, and there's plenty of examples up here of just really poor housing, and a lot of that is houses that are built in the 60s and 70s, not that long ago, when the real push was to try and stop drafty homes, but we closed them up too well and didn't consider how to ventilate buildings to make for that kind of safe breathing environment. So those are kind of the key the key benefits that we see, but it also has fire resilient properties and also acoustic absorbing nature as well. So it's kind of hempcrete as a building method is really encompassing.
Yeah, so I'm curious about how you could build a home with it, because I'm told there's a lot of regulation around building materials in the wake of leaky buildings and the likes. A lot of people are nervous about new building materials, and the regulators and those policing the types of building materials we have, brands, and the rules under the Building Act can make it difficult to get new building materials in. I mean, is it legal for me to build a home with hempcrete at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. And we have actually just had our first resource consent issued for a GEOBIND project for a residential build up here from the Far North District Council, and it was surprisingly easy. So at the moment, there is a way through the building code. I think they're called alternative building methods, and it means that you need someone like an engineer to specify the product for you. Which with hempcrete, because it's been around for centuries, there's lots of really evidential based reporting out there that building officers can use and engineers can use to safely specify that product.
And how does it stack up cost-wise versus the traditional? Well, when I say traditional, the way it's done at the moment with insulation material, fiberboard, and plasterboard or bricks.
Yeah, so one of the comparisons that we do is a relatively typical type of New Zealand building methodology. You mentioned you have insulation, your cavity system, and then say a weatherboard exterior with jib in between. So a GEOBIND walling system comes in just slightly cheaper per metre square than that kind of walling system, which is huge, because while I would pay more for carbon reduction and a better environment to live in, not everyone would. So it's really critical that we can make these products that are good for the environment cost comparative as well, because that's where, if we're looking at the building stock in New Zealand on a whole, a lot of it is mass development. And for mass development, you need competitive prices. Those are the products that get chosen. So that price point is a really key factor.
And do I have to do it on site, pour the mixture into the boxing on the actual site, or are you looking at prefabricating? So a lot of these huge projects, they like to prefabricate and bring it together at the last minute. Prefabrication is the holy grail in theory. How are you going on that front?
Yeah, so at the moment, if you wanted to use a GEOBIND product or hempcrete in New Zealand, then you would use that hand-placed model, mixing it on site. But we, because of the really unique properties of our binder and the strength that it's portraying, there's opportunity for us to move into prefabricated panelized products. So we're looking at a SIPS type structure, so a structural insulated panel, but also just panels kind of like you would replace a jib type fixture to your house. And so that will really help, again, like you're saying, with the use of this in a more mass type of setting. So that's something we're really excited about, and we're working with existing manufacturer facilities to try and get a product like that to market as soon as possible, because it is a bit of a, I think they call it a white space at the moment. So there's not a lot of innovation happening in the building industry.
Why is that? I mean, you've been a planner, someone who's thought about how we solve some of these problems, and you're not the first person to say that the building industry is quite conservative. What's going on there?
I mean, I think it's relatively well accepted that there's quite a hold by a couple of certain companies on building products. And I think, regulation is really important, but it is definitely a barrier to moving some of these new products into the space cost effectively. So there's really huge upfront costs to trying to innovate new products. So it means that it is left to those couple of players who have the big money and the existing markets to be able to push new products in. So I think that's one of the handbrakes. I'm sure there's many others. I guess you need demand. And I think the regulation change that's happening is going to really help that. So there are moves in regulation to help target the net zero 2050 requirements, and I guess as they filter down through into regulation, they will really create the need for a step change in the industry. But I don't know how they're going to be able to activate it as quickly as they need to when there's just very little options out there. So we're really hoping to jump on the coattails of that and be in a position where we can be first to market.
And one of the things that I'm curious about with carbon neutral or carbon negative materials is the idea, a bit like a forest planter, that I can get some carbon credits out of this, that in the process of spending money to build a house, someone might give me money to store carbon in the house. Is that a possibility?
Imagine that. I mean, it could be under the current framework and the emissions trading scheme framework that we work under currently in New Zealand. Hemp isn't a listed woody biomass that they use in their calculations, but that's not how it works elsewhere in the world. And so we're really keen to kind of be involved in conversations around how we get other woody mass materials like hemp included in that framework so that you can do exactly that, so that you can be rewarded for not only offsetting your building footprint emissions, but then also the continued sequestering that that product can do.
Because you're saying that once the hempcrete has been set and put in place, it actually does absorb some carbon as well. So this is after the growing process.
Yeah, to a degree. And we are yet to kind of have that piece of work done in New Zealand to just, make sure that those internationally made statements are factual to the New Zealand setting. And that's because it costs a lot of money to do that. But that's something that we really want to do because we think there's a real opportunity there to, I guess, lobby and get this type of woody biomass included on that list.
And I'm just curious whether you could actually build 50,000 homes in New Zealand, which is around what we produce at the moment, with hempcrete, because that's an awful lot of stuff. Do we grow enough hemp? Is there enough easily accessible material that you produce in terms of GEOBIND?
So for the binder, yeah, that's totally achievable. Where the crunch point for us at the moment is the hemp production. So it's a relatively new industry in New Zealand. I think it was during kind of COVID that Doug and I really came across hemp building as a way to build. Doug was looking at how he could move his construction business forward in these kind of sustainability focused times. And we were also looking at materials to use for our house, and we came across hemp as this international way of tested way of building, but there wasn't at that point much of a hemp industry in New Zealand. So since then, it has really taken off, predominantly for food and fibres, and there's this waste, the shiv, the hurd that we use. But at the moment, they're producing around 1,000 tonnes, I believe, and so that is just doing a quick calculation. So sorry, it's 1,000 hectares a year. So that's about enough for 1,000 homes. But, like any industry, it's going to be driven by demand. We don't have a shortage of land space. It's a super easy to grow crop. It doesn't require any or very little water and can be grown in almost all soil conditions that we experience here in New Zealand. So as soon as there's a demand for this, what is now waste product, the shiv, there's nothing stopping this becoming more commonly grown in New Zealand for sure.
And just to be clear, this is different from a cannabis plant, which may be grown for medicinal cannabis or whatever.
Yeah, so it's a totally legal crop to grow in New Zealand. Yeah.
And we could really grow this on any existing farmland instead of, dairy farms or sheep farms or even forests.
Yeah, it's incredibly diverse and easy to grow. I understand that there are, depending on what you grow it for, whether you're growing it for the food, the fibre or the woody shiv, you might experience better conditions or better growth conditions throughout the country. But the shiv that we need is very, not really impacted as much as the food crop might be by different conditions. So, yeah, it could be grown anywhere throughout the country and relatively easily as well. There is actually, I believe that Dairy NZ did some work a while ago into how hemp growth or hemp might be used as I'm not sure if it was for a fodder crop, but for a break crop because it also has some good soil conditioning properties. But I think because of I don't know, what that industry is like, anything slight that might show up in the milk products that wouldn't usually is a big no.
Yeah. Alice Hosted, thank you so much for being on When the Facts Change.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Cheers.
Mm-hmm.